The card was red, thick and glossy, and it had my husband's handwriting on the envelope. I remember standing by the front door, the cold from outside still clinging to my coat, staring at my own name written in a careful, unfamiliar slant. Merry Christmas was stamped across the front in gold letters, and for just a second I smiled. I thought maybe, just maybe, he was trying again. Then I opened it. Inside, the message was short, neat, almost cheerful. Thank you for sharing him with me. I hope you enjoy the holidays as much as I have. There was no signature, just a lipstick kiss pressed into the bottom corner, faint but unmistakable. I stood there for a long time, the house quiet around me, the Christmas lights on the tree blinking softly like they were breathing. The smell of pine and cinnamon candles hung in the air. Somewhere down the hall, the washing machine clicked as it finished its cycle. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life, but nothing was ordinary anymore. Before that card arrived, my life was simple in a way I didn't appreciate enough. Not perfect, no marriage ever is, but familiar, comfortable, built over years like a well-worn quilt, patched in places but still warm. My husband, David, and I had been married for 27 years, long enough that people stopped asking how we met and started saying things like, "You two are solid." Long enough that we knew each other's habits without thinking. He liked his coffee black, no sugar. I folded towels one way, he folded them another, and we never argued about it anymore. We just refolded each other's work in silence. We lived in a modest two-story house on a quiet street where everyone decorated early for Christmas. David always complained about the lights, said they ran up the electric bill. But every year, without fail, he'd be out there on a ladder, grumbling to himself while carefully hanging them anyway. We had 2 grown children, both out of the house, one married, one still finding their way. December was usually a month of phone calls, planning visits, asking who was bringing what dish. Noise, laughter, controlled chaos. That year felt a little quieter. David had been distant, but not in a way that screamed danger. More like tired. He came home later than usual, said work was busy, budgets were tight, end-of-year stress. I believed him because it made sense, because I wanted to. At night, he'd sit on the edge of the bed scrolling through his phone, the glow lighting up his face while I pretended to read. Sometimes I'd ask what he was looking at, and he'd say, "Nothing important." Without looking up, "Nothing important." I told myself marriage went through seasons. I told myself Christmas was stressful. I told myself not to borrow trouble. Still, there were moments, small ones that didn't sit right. He started guarding his phone like it was a secret diary. If I walked into the room, he'd turn it face down. When I asked who he was texting, he'd say, "Just a coworker," too quickly, like the words were rehearsed. He stopped asking about my day. That part hurt more than I admitted. We used to talk about everything. The neighbor's new dog, the price of groceries, the way my knee ached in the cold. Now, conversations felt one-sided, like I was throwing words into a well and waiting for an echo that never came. Still, I wrapped presents, I baked cookies, I played Christmas music while vacuuming the living room, humming along to songs I'd known since childhood. I told myself that whatever was off would pass, that we'd sit across from each other on Christmas morning, coffee in hand, and laugh about how silly we'd been. The card arrived 3 days before Christmas. It was mixed in with the usual mail bills, flyers, a postcard from my cousin in Arizona. Nothing about it stood out until I saw my name. The envelope was heavier than a normal card, expensive. The kind you picked up at a specialty store, not the grocery aisle. I opened it slowly, standing there in my coat, my purse still on my shoulder. By the time I read the message, my fingers had gone numb. My first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion. Sharing him, I whispered out loud, like saying the word might make it make sense. I read it again and again. The meaning didn't change. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a ribbon around my ribs and pulled too hard. I leaned against the wall, the card shaking in my hand. My reflection stared back at me from the hallway mirror, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. A woman who looked older in that moment than she had that morning. I didn't cry right away. I don't know why. Maybe shock has its own kind of silence. David was still at work. Or at least that's what he'd said when he left that morning, kissing my cheek like always. I thought about calling him, about demanding an explanation. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the card until the words burned into my memory. Thank you for sharing him with me. It was bold, cruel, almost celebratory. Whoever sent it knew exactly what they were doing. I folded the card and slipped it back into the envelope. My hands were steady by then, which scared me more than if they'd been shaking. I made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink. I turned off the oven where cookies had just finished baking and left them inside, forgotten. That night, I didn't say anything. David came home late, shrugged off his coat, and asked what was for dinner. His voice sounded normal, comfortable. He talked about traffic, about a meeting that ran long. He didn't notice the envelope tucked into my apron pocket. Or maybe he did and chose not to. I watched him eat, watched the way he chewed, the way he wiped his mouth with his napkin. 27 years, and suddenly I felt like I was sitting across from a stranger. I waited for the right moment to ask him about the card. It didn't come. That night, I lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of our house settling. The heater clicked on and off. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly, tires hissing against cold pavement. David's breathing was even beside me, the steady rhythm of someone unburdened by secrets, or so it sounded. I turned toward him, studying the shape of his face in the dim light. 27 years had etched small lines around his eyes, softened his jaw. This was the man who held my hand when my father died, who burned pancakes every Sunday morning and still ate them proudly, the man I had trusted with my entire adult life. I slipped out of bed quietly and padded down the hallway to the kitchen. The Christmas tree lights were still on, casting soft shadows across the walls. I sat at the table and pulled the card from my apron pocket like it might disappear if I waited too long. I examined it carefully this time, like evidence. The handwriting inside wasn't David's. That much I was sure of. His letters were rounder, messier. This handwriting was sharp, intentional, confident, the kind of penmanship that belonged to someone who wanted to be seen. The lipstick mark bothered me the most. It was a deep red, carefully placed, not smudged. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate, a signature without a name. I asked myself a dozen questions I didn't want the answers to. How long had this been going on? How many times had I sat across from him, smiling, while someone else claimed pieces of my marriage? And why now? Christmas had always been our time. Even when money was tight or the kids were small and exhausted, we made it special. Traditions mattered to us, or so I thought. The next morning, I moved through the day like everything was fine. Muscle memory carried me through breakfast, through folding laundry, through answering a call from my sister who wanted to know if we were still hosting Christmas dinner. Of course, I said. My voice sounded normal. Nothing's changed. That was a lie. David left early again, saying he needed to pick up a few last-minute things. He didn't say what. He didn't ask if I wanted to come along. When the door closed behind him, I didn't cry. Instead, I cleaned. I scrubbed the bathroom sink until my hands were raw. I vacuumed the living room twice. I wiped down the kitchen counters even though they were already spotless. Cleaning gave me something to do with my hands, something that didn't involve shaking. By mid-afternoon, I did something I'd never done before in our entire marriage. I checked his coat pockets. It felt wrong, invasive, like crossing a line I'd always believed in. Trust was sacred to me, or at least it had been. His wall, it was the same as always. Receipts, credit cards, our family photo tucked into the clear sleeve. I stared at that picture for a long time. Us at the beach years ago, sunburned and smiling, arms around each other like we were unbreakable. In the inside pocket of his coat, I found a small folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a boutique downtown. Not a place he'd ever shopped before. The total made my stomach drop. I unfolded it slowly. A scarf. Cashmere, deep red. I didn't own a scarf like that. I put everything back exactly where I found it and sat down on the edge of the couch, my heart pounding. The room felt smaller, like the walls had shifted closer while I wasn't looking. That evening, I tested him. "Did you get everything done today?" I asked casually as we ate dinner. He nodded. "Yeah, took longer than I thought." "What did you end up buying?" I asked, keeping my eyes on my plate. He hesitated, just for a second, but after 27 years, I knew his pauses. "Just a few things," he said. "Nothing exciting." I nodded and let it go, but something inside me hardened. Over the next 2 days, I paid attention in a way I never had before. I noticed how he showered as soon as he came home, how he stepped outside to take phone calls, even in the cold, how he smiled at his phone, sometimes just a quick curve of his mouth he didn't realize I could see. The card sat hidden in the back of my sock drawer, but it felt like it was everywhere. Every time he touched my arm, I thought about someone else's hands. Every time he said my name, I heard the echo of that woman's voice, thanking me for sharing him. On Christmas Eve, he came home with the scarf. He handed it to me awkwardly, like he wasn't sure how to hold it. "I saw this and thought of you," he said. It was beautiful, soft, exactly my color, and I hated it. "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile. "It's lovely." He looked relieved, kissed my cheek, and went to wash his hands. I stood there holding the scarf, my fingers sinking into the fabric, and wondered if it had been meant for someone else first. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up before dawn. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy rather than peaceful. I made coffee and sat by the tree, staring at the wrapped presents underneath it. One of them wasn't from David. I recognized the paper immediately, red with gold snowflakes, the same style as the card. My name was written on it again, in that same confident handwriting. My heart sank. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. I picked it up slowly, my hands trembling now despite my efforts to stay calm. I knew, before I opened it, that whatever was inside would change everything, and somewhere deep down, I realized the card hadn't been the first clue. It had been a warning. I sat there for a long time with that gift in my hands, listening to the coffee maker sputter and click as it finished brewing. The Christmas lights reflected off the wrapping paper, making the gold snowflakes shimmer like they were alive. My name looked heavier this time, pressed into the paper with intention. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I set it on the coffee table and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A thin layer of frost coated the lawns. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed, sharp and bright in the early morning air. Christmas was happening everywhere else, just not in my chest. When I finally sat back down, I peeled the tape slowly, carefully, as if speed might make the truth worse. Inside the box was a photo frame. My breath caught. The picture inside was of David. He was standing in front of a Christmas tree I didn't recognize. His arm wrapped around a woman I'd never seen before. She was younger than me, maybe by 10 years, long dark hair, a smile that looked practiced. Her head leaned into his shoulder like she belonged there. On the back of the frame, written in the same handwriting as the card, were 3 words, "He loves me." I felt something drain out of me, then like all the blood in my body had decided to leave at once. My ears rang. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from sliding out of the chair. So this was real, not a joke. Not a misunderstanding, not my imagination running wild after too many years of marriage. This was a woman who knew exactly who I was. And she wanted me to know exactly who she was too. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the frame. I didn't cry. I sat there and stared at that picture until the coffee went cold and the sun climbed higher in the sky. When David came down the stairs, cheerful and unsuspecting, I was still sitting in the same spot, Merry Christmas, he said, smiling. I slid the frame across the table toward him. His smile vanished. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at it. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The silence stretched between us thick and unbearable. "Who is she?" I asked quietly. He swallowed. "Where did you get this?" "That's not the question," I said. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me, rubbing his hands together like he was cold. "It's not what it looks like," he said. I almost laughed. "Then explain it to me," I said. My voice was calm, but there was a sharpness underneath it that even I could hear. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, and something in his eyes shifted. Guilt, maybe, or relief, or fear. "Her name is Claire," he said. The name landed like a weight. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated again. "How long, David?" "A little over a year," he said softly. "A year, every late night, every guarded phone call, every distance I'd felt and talked myself out of. A year of my life I would never get back. Does she know about me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes," he said. "Does she know about our kids?" "Yes." "And she still sent me that," I said, nodding toward the card and the frame. He winced. "I didn't know she was going to do that, but she did," I said, "and she knew exactly what she was doing." I stood up then, my legs shaky but steady enough to carry me. I walked to the hallway, opened my sock drawer, and brought back the card. I placed it on the table between us. He stared at it like it might bite him. "She thanked me," I said, "for sharing you." His face crumpled. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. That was when I finally felt anger rise, hot and sharp. "You don't accidentally have an affair for a year," I said. "You don't accidentally let another woman think she has the right to contact your wife." He buried his face in his hands. "I was lonely," he said. "We drifted apart. You didn't think I'd find out," I said. That silenced him. I thought about all the times I'd asked him how his day was, all the meals I'd cooked, all the quiet evenings I'd spent beside him, believing in us. And Christmas, I asked, "You brought her a scarf, didn't you?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. "I want to know everything," I said, "not your excuses, the truth." So he told me. They met through work. It started as lunches, then drinks, then nights he told me he was working late. She knew he was married. She said she was okay with it. She said she understood. "And the card?" I asked. He shook his head. "She said she was tired of hiding, that she wanted a future with you," I said. He didn't deny it. The house felt different after that conversation, like it had been hollowed out, leaving only walls and memories behind. I went upstairs and sat on the bed we'd shared for decades, staring at the indentation where he slept. My hands finally started to shake then. My throat burned. The tears came quietly, one by one, soaking into the quilt. Downstairs, the Christmas music kept playing. I realized then that Claire hadn't sent that card to hurt me. She sent it to claim him, and whether he admitted it or not, he'd already let her try. I stayed upstairs for a long time after that, long enough for the Christmas music downstairs to loop through the same songs twice, long enough for the smell of coffee to fade and be replaced by the faint scent of pine from the tree. When I finally came back down, David was still sitting at the kitchen table, his shoulders slumped, his hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. "I'm going to my sister's," I said, grabbing my coat. He looked up, panic flashing across his face. "Please don't, not today. Today already happened," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." I drove through the quiet streets with tears blurring my vision, forcing myself to breathe at every red light. My sister's house was warm and loud, full of people and laughter. She hugged me tight, asked if everything was okay. Yes, I lied. I just needed to be around family. That night, after everyone went to bed, I lay on the guest room mattress staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly above me. My mind replayed every moment of the past year, re-examining them under a harsh new light. By morning, my sadness had hardened into something steadier. Resolve. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. And I wasn't going to let another woman control the narrative of my life. When I returned home the next day, David was gone. He'd left a note on the counter. I'm giving you space. I'm staying at a hotel. I folded the note neatly and set it aside. The house felt empty, but it also felt like it was finally breathing again. That afternoon, I sat down with a notebook and began writing. Dates, times, small details I'd ignored before. When he'd started coming home late, when he'd stopped touching me in passing, when the excuses began to repeat. Then I did something else I'd never done before. I reached out to her. I found her easily. Social media made that part almost cruelly simple. Claire smiled brightly in her profile picture. Her head tilted just slightly like she knew her good side. Her page was full of holiday decorations, dinners out, photos that carefully avoided showing too much of the man behind the camera. I sent her one message. I received your card. She replied within minutes. I was wondering when you would. My hands trembled as I typed. What do you want? The typing dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. I want honesty, she wrote. I'm tired of being invisible. You're not invisible, I replied. You're a guest in someone else's life. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her message was longer. He told me your marriage was over in everything but name. He said you were roommates. He said you didn't love him anymore. I stared at the screen, a bitter smile pulling at my lips. He lied to both of us, I wrote, but only one of us chose to hurt someone else to get what she wanted. There was a long pause after that. I didn't mean to hurt you, she finally wrote. I closed the app. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her explanation. What I needed was clarity. Over the next few days, I spoke to a lawyer. Quietly, calmly, I learned things I should have known years ago about finances, about options, about what dignity looks like when a marriage ends. David called. I didn't answer. He texted. I didn't reply. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself. When we finally met to talk, it was in the living room, with the tree still standing between us like a fragile witness. I've ended it with her, he said quickly, like it might earn him something. That wasn't your decision alone, I said. And it doesn't erase what happened. He looked smaller somehow, older. I want to fix this, he said. I thought about the card, the picture, the words he loves me written so confidently in another woman's hand. Some things don't get fixed, I said, they get accepted. We talked for hours about the kids, about the house, about what came next. There were tears. There was anger. But there was also honesty for the first time in a long time. By the end of the night, we both knew. This marriage, as it had been, was over, but my story wasn't. In the days that followed, I learned what quiet strength felt like. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It showed up in small decisions like choosing not to answer the phone when David called for the 5th time in one afternoon, or making myself a proper meal instead of skipping dinner because I didn't feel hungry. I stayed in the house for a while, not because it was easy, but because it was mine too. Every room held memories, yes, but they were my memories as much as his. I refused to be chased out of my own life by someone else's choices. David came by once to pick up clothes. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure of where to look. I told the kids, he said softly. I nodded. They deserve the truth. They're upset. He added, confused, they'll survive. I said, so will I. That night, my daughter called me. Her voice was tight, controlled. Mom, she said, why didn't you tell us sooner? Because I didn't know how to say your father chose someone else without breaking something inside myself. Because I was still learning how to say it out loud. I needed time. I told her, and I didn't want Christmas to be about this. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm proud of you. That was the first time I cried since the morning I opened the card. Not from pain, but from relief. A week later, I ran into someone at the grocery store, a woman from church. She looked at me carefully, the way people do when they sense something has shifted. "I heard about you and David," she said gently. So it had started. The story moved faster than I expected. Small towns have a way of carrying news like wind carries leaves. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't add details. I simply said, "We're separating," and let the silence speak for itself. Then came the part I hadn't planned for. Claire showed up at my door. It was late afternoon, gray and cold. I recognized her immediately, even without the practiced smile from her photos. She looked smaller in person. "Nervous, I just want to talk," she said. I considered closing the door. Instead, I stepped aside. We sat at opposite ends of the living room. The Christmas tree was gone now, the space it left behind stark and bare. "I didn't think he'd choose you," she said suddenly, her voice brittle. "He said he was leaving." I folded my hands in my lap. "He told you what you wanted to hear." Tears welled up in her eyes. I gave up everything for him. I felt something then, but it wasn't satisfaction. It was clarity. "You didn't give anything up for him," I said calmly. "You took something that wasn't yours. That's different." She flinched. "I'm not here to fight you," she said. I needed you to know I wasn't trying to hurt you." I thought of the card, the picture, the words written so deliberately. "You wanted to be seen," I said, "and you chose the cruelest way to do it." She left soon after that. No apology, no goodbye, and I didn't need one. 2 weeks later, David moved out. The house felt strange that first night alone. Too quiet, too empty. I slept with the lamp on, just to soften the darkness. In the morning, I made coffee and realized something surprising. I could breathe. I started doing things for myself again, walking in the mornings, cooking meals I liked. Sitting in silence without feeling the need to fill it. The lawyer helped me sort through the practical things. Accounts, paperwork, decisions that felt heavy but necessary. Each signature felt like a small reclaiming of myself. By the time word reached the wider circle, friends, co-workers, distant relatives, the narrative had settled into something simple. David had an affair. I chose myself. People stopped asking questions after that, and on one quiet evening in early January, I found the Christmas card again. Still tucked away, still pristine. I held it for a moment, then tore it in half, not angrily, just decisively. By February, the truth had finished making its rounds. Not in a dramatic, headline kind of way, but in the slow, inevitable way small communities digest reality. At church, people hugged me a little longer than usual. At the coffee shop, conversations paused when I walked in, then resumed with a softer tone. No one asked for details. They didn't need them. David, on the other hand, had become a quiet lesson people observed without comment. He stopped coming to church altogether. I heard he'd switched grocery stores to avoid familiar faces. Someone mentioned he'd taken a leave from work. Another said he looked tired, older. I didn't feel triumph in any of it. Just a strange, distant sadness. Not for him, but for what we'd lost trying to pretend we were something we were no longer protecting. The kids came to visit one Sunday afternoon. We sat around the kitchen table, the same one where I'd opened that card weeks before. I'd made soup, nothing fancy, something warm. My son stared into his bowl for a long time before finally looking up. "Dad says he's sorry," he said carefully. "I believe he is." I replied, "That doesn't mean you have to forgive him." My daughter added quickly. I met her eyes and smiled softly. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. They both nodded, absorbing that truth in their own time. Later that week, I received a message from someone I didn't expect. "Claire, I'm moving away," she wrote. "I thought you should know." I stared at the screen, surprised by how little I felt. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I replied. And I meant it, not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying resentment felt heavier than letting go. Spring arrived quietly. The trees outside my house began to bud. green pushing through brown branches like life, insisting on continuing. I started opening the windows again, letting fresh air in. One afternoon, I ran into David at the post office. He looked startled to see me, then resigned. "You look well," he said. "I am," I replied truthfully. He nodded. I wanted to say I never should have let it go that far. "No," I said gently, "you shouldn't have let it start." He swallowed hard, then stepped aside to let me pass. As I walked out into the sunlight, I realized something important. The consequence wasn't humiliation. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't even losing me. The consequence was having to live with the truth without hiding. And that was something only he could carry. That night, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind move through the trees. The world felt quieter but also clearer. For the first time in a long time, my life felt like it belonged to me again. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, in moments so small I almost missed them. The first time I slept through the night without waking up with that tight feeling in my chest. First morning I realized I hadn't checked my phone to see if David had called. The first time I laughed, really laughed, without immediately feeling guilty for it. I started rearranging the house in quiet, meaningful ways, not remodeling, just reclaiming. I moved the armchair closer to the window where the afternoon light poured in. I replaced the heavy curtains David had always liked with lighter ones that let the sun filter through. I took down a framed photo from the hallway, not angrily, just thoughtfully, and replaced it with a simple mirror. I wanted to see myself when I walked past. Friends invited me out more often. Coffee dates, walks, small dinners that didn't require explanations. I said yes when I felt like it and no when I didn't. Both felt empowering. One evening, while cleaning out the hall closet, I found the red scarf. Still folded neatly, still soft, still beautiful. For a moment my hands froze, then I wrapped it around my neck and looked at myself in the mirror. It didn't belong to Betrayal anymore. It belonged to me. That realization surprised me enough to make me smile. The kids adjusted in their own ways. They asked questions sometimes, hard ones, honest ones. "Do you miss him?" My daughter asked one night as we washed dishes together. "I miss the version of him I thought I had," I said, "but I don't miss living in doubt." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." I thought about Christmas often, not with pain, but with clarity. How something meant to hurt me had instead forced the truth into the open. How a single card had ended years of quiet denial. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if she hadn't sent it. Would I still be pretending? Would I still be folding myself smaller to keep peace? The answer mattered less than the lesson. I began writing again, journaling, not about the affair, but about myself, about who I was before marriage became the center of my identity. About the woman who loved long walks, who noticed details, who believed in dignity even when it cost her comfort. One afternoon, as spring leaned into summer, I planted flowers along the front of the house, bright ones. Bold colors. A neighbor stopped to chat. "New beginnings?" she asked, smiling. "Yes," I said, and meant it. I didn't rush into anything new. I wasn't interested in replacing one life with another. I wanted to live fully, deliberately, honestly. And I did. Now, months later, when I look back at that Christmas, I don't feel pain first. I feel clarity. I feel strength. I think about the red card sometimes, the glossy paper, the lipstick mark, the words that were meant to wound me, but instead opened my eyes. It's strange how life works that way. Sometimes the very thing that seems cruelest becomes the catalyst for your own liberation. I learned that love doesn't always protect you from betrayal, but love for yourself, that will. And it doesn't matter how long you've trusted someone, how familiar their face has become, or how comfortable their presence feels. When someone chooses dishonesty over respect, the only thing left is to choose yourself. I also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness means releasing the burden, not excusing the action. I don't spend nights imagining their downfall. I don't crave revenge. I live in peace instead, and that is more powerful than anything else I could claim. Sometimes in the quiet mornings, I sit by the window with my coffee and watch the world wake up. The birds chirp. Leaves shimmer in the sunlight. The air smells faintly of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. And I breathe, truly breathe, for the first time in a long time. I've rebuilt my life in ways I didn't know were possible. I've reconnected with my children in honest, meaningful ways. I've nurtured friendships I had neglected. I've found joy in solitude, and I've remembered that my life doesn't depend on another person's choices to feel full. I don't know where David is now. I don't want to, and Claire, she moved away taking her presents and her messages with her. The echoes of that Christmas are gone, replaced with lessons and clarity. If there's one thing I hope anyone listening takes from my story, it's this: betrayal hurts, yes, but it can also teach you the boundaries of your own heart. It can show you the strength you didn't know you had. And sometimes it can be the push you need to step into a life that is truly yours. So I ask you, my dear friends, would you have stayed in silence, or would you have chosen yourself even when it was hard? If this story resonates with you, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Tell me about a time when you discovered strength in the face of betrayal. Let's talk, let's heal together. And if you want to hear more stories like this, raw, real, and reflective, please subscribe. There are more stories out there waiting for us to uncover their lessons, just like mine.